ଏବେ କୋ ଲାଇଭ କରିବି ଏପର୍ଯ୍ୟନ୍ତ କିଛି ଆରମ୍ଭ ହେଇନି। ପିଲାମାନଙ୍କୁ ଜଏନ୍ ଶୁଣ ବୋଲି ମାନେ ମୁଁ ଯୋଉଠି ଡେରି କରିଦେଲିନି ଯେ ସେମାନେ ଭାବିଲେ କୁଆଡେ ଗଲେ ମ୍ୟାଡାମ ବୋଲି ସବୁ ଇଏ କରିଦେଇଛନ୍ତି। ଏଇଟାକୁ ନେବି ୱେବ୍ ହ୍ୱାଟ୍ସଆପ୍ ଗୋଟେ ନ ଖୋଲିଲା ପରେ ସେଟା ଆସିବନି। ହ୍ୱାଟ୍ସଆପ୍ ଏବେ ଯୋଉ ଇଏ ଏମିତି କରୁଛି। ରଖ ସେଠି ରଖିବା ତମେ ରଖ ରଖିବି। ରଖିବି ରଖ ଏଠିକି ଯିବି। ସବୁବେଳେ ବାହାରିବ। ଫଟୋ ଉଠେଇବି। ହେଲା କଣ କରିବେ ମାଇକ୍ରୋସଫ୍ଟ ଏଜ୍ ସେଇଟା ଖୋଲିବ। ଏଇଠୁ ନେବି ସେ ଲିଙ୍କଟା। ନମସ୍କାର। ଆଜ୍ଞା ଆଜ୍ଞା ପଳେଇଲା। ଏଗାରଟା ଦିଆ ହେଇଥିଲା ବୋଲି ପଳେଇଲା। ଏଇଟା ବନ୍ଦ କରିଦେବି। କଣ କରିବି?
मत देख पार मैडम तो
सर गोटे मिनट टिके रुहंतु टिके।
हाँ ठीक है ठीक है।
आज्ञा सर डन करिला
हाँ मैडम नमस्कार।
नमस्कार सर
हाँ देख पड़छन मत तो हाँ
हाँ सर अभी क्या मो देखि पड़छ आपन को मो आज टिके कोन नेट ता स्लो अछि सर
अच्छा ठीक अछि
एबे देखि पाले ठीक अछि हां
आज्ञा
नमस्कार सर नमस्कार
मत टिके एनेबल कर
आपन को शेयर स्क्रीन करिवे
हाँ ठीक बता दो क्या सिद्धार्थ बता दो
वन पार्टिसिपेट कैन शेयर
मैडम से शेयर स्क्रीन पाखरे गोटे ऑप्शन थे वो
हां कोन सेटा थिबे ले करिवे कहबो को ऑप्शन ता मारिवे कहबो
शेयर स्क्रीन साइड रे गोटे ऑप्शन आसीबो शेयर स्क्रीन जो मझे शेयर स्क्रीन आसी
माने सेठी अछि वन पार्टिसिपेंट कैन शेयर मल्टीपल पार्टिसिपेंट्स कैन शेयर
आज्ञा
कोटा
आपण
मारिबी
मल्टीपल कर दियो
मल्टीपल कले प्रॉब्लम आजिकल केते बेला के जो बदमाशी करी के कोन गार पर पके दोचंदी
अच्छा एमिति अछि तो वन रे करंतु
वन रे तो अछि
वन रे माने आपण को होउची खाली सेटा
ओ ताले मल्टीपल करूची देखिबा
हाँ।
नल सेते बेला चेंज करबा
हां एमिति की करिवेनी मत लागुची
मु तो केते को मीटिंग अटेंड कला देखुची एम सब कर दोचंदी
नहीं तो आपण सार को को होस्ट कर देले सार करि परिवे
हां मु तो को होस्ट सर को होस्ट नहीं सार को एठी जो ऑप्शन ता अछि सेथिरे को होस्ट नहीं सेथिरे केवल मु आप सार को होस्ट करि परिबी तेनु मु मल्टीपल पार्टिसिपेंट कर देली
आज्ञा आज्ञा हां हे वाला
सर आपण यूनिवर्सिटी पळैलेनी
ना ना ना
आपण यूनिवर्सिटी रु कहउचंदी
ना ना घर को अछि
घर घर अच्छा
आज्ञा
लॉकडाउन पूरी एक्सटेंडेड आ कोन
हां जुलाई 1 ये दी वर्ष गला
आज्ञा मोर हेडशिप दी वर्ष बेकार गला सर
आपण मो देख पड़छ ओवर स्लाइड देख पड़छन तेथरा
हां स्लाइड देखि पारुची
हां ठीक अछि ठीक अछि ठीक अछि
एटा को अभी के मिनिमाइज कर दबा आरंभ हो जाऊ सर तापर ये करबा
ओके हां मैं कवर कर सकता इसको थोड़ा छोटा कर सकते हो इसको ये पीपीटी का क्योंकि इस पे कट जा रहा है वो आपके में कट रहा है क्यों हो रहा है हम मुझे देखना भी पड़ेगा ना थोड़ा छोटा कर दो थोड़ा सा कर दो छोटा वो पीपीटी है ना
जी
लोग तो क्या क्या करते रहते हो लोग है ना फंसाते रहते हो
ठीक है ना ये इनका ही आएगा फिर तो कनेक्शन चाहिए
इसको मुझे करना है नहीं
बस नेक्स्ट
हाँ ठीक है बढ़िया ये पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन के हेड ऑफ डिपार्टमेंट है उत्तर यूनिवर्सिटी में अभी भी उन्होंने कम सीट्स रखे हैं और हमारे ऊपर जैसे प्रेशर है कि हमें बच्चों को प्लेस करना है, वो उनके ऊपर है। यही मेजर डिफरेंस है। तो बच्चों को खुद करना
सर मु एथर YouTube लिंक टा कर देछि आपन को पठैली।
ठीक अच्छे बात। यूट्यूब लिंक है जैसे
आपन को WhatsApp रे पठैली।
यूट्यूब लिंक व्हाट्सएप पे है।
अच्छा ये टॉप चल आरो लिंक को
हाँ। तो इसमें आ जाए यूट्यूब लिंक। अच्छा बड़ा खुश है। He is retiring, so this is the last set of lectures. बहुत बढ़िया है। मैं तुमको सेट कराऊंगा अपने फैकल्टी में, वो प्रेस्टिजियस है। जैसा कि सारे कॉलेजेस में डिफरेंट स्ट्रीम से एंड यू शुड सी आल्सो एट विश्वदास में है। सर नमस्कार।
नमस्कार डॉक्टर दास, नमस्कार
सर। नमस्कार मैडम।
नमस्कार।
It's really a privilege for me that you are here.
मैडम
हाँ हेलो।
तो नमस्कार।
नमस्कार।
केमतो अछंती है? केमतो अछंती?
भला भला सर।
एक है यूनिवर्सिटी में एकेडमी, ये बाकी का फेस था कर दो ना थोड़ा सा, है ऐसे ही ऐसे रहने दो। तो मैं अपने का टाइप ही देख रही हूँ बस। ये अच्छा टॉप है, बहुत अच्छा टॉप है। I'm not exaggerating. This is one of my best work. वहाँ पर जो है ना, उनको बहुत अच्छा लगेगा। पार्टिसिपेट्स मिल गया, सारे बच्चे सुनते हैं।
नमस्कार
नमस्कार।
बाबूजी एथर आरंभ कर देबा सर।
हाँ हाँ। Already 44 people have joined. Very good.
जगह बहुत अच्छा लगता है, तो वहाँ से पास किया हूँ। They are very courteous. Not that school of management में डिस्क्रिप्टिव्स होते हैं, सुनते नहीं इसका जॉब तो होना ही है, लेकिन यहाँ से सबकी बात बचा है। इनका एक बच्चा बहुत ही पोर था, तो 16 में सर उसको 16 मेडिसिन दे सकता है, ठीक है। तो फर्स्ट मैंने कहा था कि 11 मुझे 5 बजे आया। He was late by 5 minutes. उसके ऊपर चिल्लाया मैंने, बहुत लेट कैसा हो रहा है इसलिए। अच्छा ठीक है बैठिए, ऐसा बात क्लास खत्म होने के बाद मैंने कहा कि मैनेजर से बस से आए ना, उसके सर है क्या तो बस मैं ट्यूशन करता हूँ और मैं सब कई स्टोरी ऐसे हैं, किताबें सारे मैंने उसको पैसा दिया। ऐसे 3-4 बच्चों को एक्सेजरेटिंग अफोर्ड नहीं कर सकते, इट है जो 3 वॉइस में से चूज लो, लेकिन इनको हाई करके चलो, है ना, चैलेंज है ना। मेरा ऑन है ना वीडियो, तुम चलो क्या, थैंक यू। हाँ ओके, और क्लोज करने के लिए क्लोज कर देता हूँ स्लाइड जब लास्ट में। थैंक यू सर। देह केमती अच्छी प्रतिभा प्रतिभाबू
सर भल अच्छी आज्ञा
बड़ा माने एते लोकंकर देह भाव खराब होची
आज्ञा सेबा जने कहिले जे
हाँ।
पचारिबनी केमिति अछंती के ना अच्छी as you meet people in webinar and WhatsApp, that's the only way you know that they are fine. Sir, the Ethraka second wave has been very merciless.
Very
It
much.
has entered all homes. We have lost a lot of people. Those who have added, those could have added values to Orissa. बहुत लोग passed away.
आपण विश्वास करिवेनी हमर जो पिलाटी हम घरे रहूची
आज्ञा
हम 8 वर्ष ला अछि पो बेले अछि
आज्ञा
ताको कोविड हिच एबे भलो हे गेला एबे
आज्ञा
हमें 10 दिन एमिति ना तो खैछु आज्ञा आ कहबा
नहीं बहुत असुविधा माने आपनकर से जो ट्रीटमेंट एंड द फॉलो अप्स सो पैथेटिक अवस्था मोर गोटे सांगटे ही वाज द ओनली पर्सन कॉन्शियस द लास्ट टाइम जो हितला पहले 10 जन भीतर 9 जन वर सेमी कोमेटिक कोमा आई वाज ओनली वन एंड आई हैड अ हेल ऑफ अ टाइम 10 डेज तो आपनकर ऑनलाइन बोधे चलथिबो सब एखना नै इंस्टीट्यूट
ऑनलाइन चली छी किंतु भारी अनसैटिस्फैक्टरी एकदम बहुत अनसैटिस्फैक्टरी
नहीं सी जो ट्रस्ट है माने वी हैव सीन यू डिलीवरिंग इन बाणी विहार
that energy, that involvement.
So जो मध्य का eyeball contact, that is so very important.
On a lighter note, बुझले कि मैडम,
Yeah.
once Mrs. Gandhi had gone to US. Sethu say कहला I don't require spoon, I'll eat with my hands. Sethu Lyndon B. Johnson कहले ma'am, I'm really surprised that you use hands. से कहले yes, in India we do not make love through an interpreter.
Fantastic.
छोटा छोटा नगेट्स गुड़ा का भारी बढ़िया एकदम हाथ से खाइबार जो मजा माछ खाइ परिबे आपण चामच रे कोन
माछ छुई
माछ हो कि चिकन हो कि जहाँ भी हो नॉन वेज आप चामच रे खाई परिबे
ना ना
unless and until it is boneless.
on bread ଆଉ पूरी साइड संतुला with chili and
हाथ न लगले हबो
से तार गोटे साटिस्फैक्शन भी अलग महाप्रसाद अपन हाथ न लगिले चामचरे खाइबे महाप्रसाद से बढ़िया
बहुत
So sir हमें आरंभ करिबा already a number of participants have joined.
Okay.
Now we have 50 plus 54.
Yes. That's fine.
And maybe some might have joined in the YouTube also because I have shared the YouTube link with the students. So a very warm good morning to our keynote speaker, Professor Mishra, my friends in academia, and my colleagues and dear students and esteemed participants. Today we are going to discuss India's development dilemmas, and this topic is of utmost importance today because there is a intellectual debate, a criticism is going on that India has shown poor performance in terms of attaining the sustainable development goals.
And also these criticisms are important to us as Orias, because Odisha has been lately rated as a higher performing state. And here also what we find is that Odisha has also reduced its ranks in terms of realizing the sustainable development goals. So in this context, I requested our esteemed speaker, Professor Mishra, who is a development economist and takes interest in the current economic issues. I requested him that, sir, our students are interested to know about the reality from you, and that is how Professor Mishra readily agreed. And today we have a 2-day symposium. Let me introduce Professor Mishra. Professor Mishra knows no introduction so far as the academia or students of Odisha is concerned. In my department, every batch of students are acquainted with his name, because our academic session never ends without 2-3 lectures of Professor Mishra. So that is how he is with us. The most vital part of his personality is that he is unlike of many civil servants. He served the Indian civil service in different services full term, and being in civil service also, he continued his interest in academics. And the manual he prepared, defense procurement manual, in 2005 for the defense, and that was highly appreciated, and he was also awarded for preparing that manual. So his service career was very eventful. It came to an end in 2012, and after that, he has come out as a great academician and a columnist, writes regularly in Odisha Post. And people say that life begins after retirement. Professor Mishra is a shining example of this. Since I will be superannuating after 1 month, so all the time, every moment I think about him, how to make my post-retirement life very, very productive and constructive. If you go to, if you Google his name, he has written a number of articles on economics, which are being published in index journals like Scoopus and Web of Science and all this, and Sedge publication, Taylor and Francis. And he writes on contemporary economic issues. That is why his articles are very, very vital. And he has also written a book on Canopy of Hopes. And recently he edited a book on the problems of disabled. And also he has written a book on impact of defense upsets on military industry capability and self-reliance, the road ahead. So wherever he is, he tries to infuse philosophy and intellectualism to his environment, may it be the civil service, may it be the academia. KIT University has been enriched by such scholars, and now I welcome Professor Mishra. Let me tell you, be with us for 2 days, because I requested Professor Mishra that one lecture will not be enough to know about India's development dilemmas. So we made it 2 days. So tomorrow at 11, we will again meet to hear Professor Mishra, and right after this meeting, I will share with you the tomorrow's link, because I didn't share both the links together because it will create confusion. So right after this link, I will share with you tomorrow's link. So over to Professor Mishra for his lecture.
Good morning, friends. At the outset, let me thank Professor Surna Tripathi, a very, very dear colleague, a very wonderful colleague, academic colleague, to have invited me to deliver these two lectures on the development dilemma and India's scorecard on the SDG. Today, I will cover the development dilemmas, and tomorrow I'll be going into the interstate performance with a reference to the sustainable development goals. I also thank Dr. Pradeep Mishra, Dr. Das, my dear colleagues, to have taken the time out, and all my students and well-wishers to have made it convenient to be part of this very important intellectual journey. I start, friends, I start my presentation with four essential modules. The first module would be based on five very, very important ideas, which I think every student of social science, natural science must be familiar with, and more so if you are a student dabbling in journalism. Now, these ideas span for over 250 years. I haven't gone beyond Adam Smith, so therefore I have limited myself to the philosophy of Adam Smith and his Wealth of Nations. It started in 1776, and I would end with the ideas of Jeffrey Sachs. So there are five very, very major ideas I would like to share, which have made a very, very definitive and transformative impact on different nations and the world. The second module would be how I'll be defining development and how do we measure development. Before we say that India is not developing well, so how do we measure it? The third module would be India's experience with economic growth and human development, because I consider that these are like the two wheels of a nation's chariot. So if you neglect one of the wheels, then obviously your economic chariot, your chariot is certainly chariot will not move smoothly, effective. And the fourth module, friends, I always go back to the Indian Constitution, and then I'll try to, well, with a few very, very important articles, which deal with socio-economic justice, development, growth and development, and what has been our realization with reference to those expectations. And the last would be my final thoughts on this. So this is, ma'am, I intend to go about it. I'll take about 50 to 55 minutes, and then we'll have a freewheeling discussion for about half an hour. Is that okay, ma'am, with all of you?
Sir, no problem.
Yeah. So we start with the first very important slides. I said there are 5 ideas. So I have 4 ideas on this particular slide. The first idea is the idea of wealth creation. The father of this particular idea was Adam Smith, as you can see on the left-hand side. He wrote the magnum opus Wealth of Nations, and very precisely what Adam Smith was trying to say, that the market forces, as if by an invisible hand, will promote welfare of all. Smith was very, very clear in his mind. The Scottish professor is very, very clear in his mind that if the buyers and the sellers are completely free, there would be wealth of nations. He also made a mention about division of labor, So therefore, he said that if you have free market forces and if people specialize in that area of aptitude, it is going to create wealth. The second very important idea was that of classless society, which was espoused by Karl Marx about 90 years after Adam Smith. Now, Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776, and the Industrial Revolution came to Europe and US in the early 19th century, 1815 to 1865. So Adam Smith, so Marx was writing during the height of Industrial Revolution, when countries were really, really prosperous. But Marx was really anguished by the exploitation of labor. So while Smith was all for wealth creation, Marx was all for social justice, equity, a classless society. And he believed that the structure of the capitalist society is such that it will create the seeds of its own destruction. And the famous dialectical materialism that he mentioned, he wrote that capitalism, the thesis, will call into being its antithesis, that is organized labor. And from the resultant class, the final synthesis of a classless society will emerge when prehistory will end and history will begin. I remember as a student when Professor Ramchandra Das used to quote this, we used to have goosebumps, when prehistory ends and history begins. The history of a society will be written only when it is equitable, just, and classless. This was till 1867. And as all of you know, that the world was divided into two ideological camps. 2/3 embracing what Smith said, what we call as capitalism, and 1/3 of the world, Eastern Europe, China, Russia, Cuba, part of Latin America, they became more inclined towards the left ideology. So a great thinker, Karl Marx, he saw Lenin and other very, very great leaders. So therefore, the world was divided thanks to this wonderful idea of a classless society. Now, as all of you know, that in 1990 was a watershed moment for the world when the Berlin Wall fell and USSR disintegrated. Very, very two momentous events in global history. And that is the time, so when people believed that communism is finished, socialism is past. And then you had this Harvard professor, a Japanese writer, Francis Fukuyama. He wrote a magnum opus, End of History, where he says that what we may be witness to is not just end of Cold War, an end point of mankind's ideological evolution, but Western liberal democracy as the final form of human history. Basically, the idea that came out of Francis Fukuyama, that all this ideological conflict between free market, socialism, state dominance, that's all over. Now we are into liberal democracy. So for Fukuyama, it was a cocktail between liberal democracy and free market. Many people do not take into account the fact that Fukuyama was also a great supporter of free market. So therefore, he said that with the end of the Cold War, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, with the disintegration of USSR, we have come to the end point of an ideological debate. So that's the third very, very important idea. So from wealth creation to classless society to liberal democracy. So that's the third very, very important idea which came in 1990. Then we have a very, very wonderful writer, Jeffrey Sachs. He wrote a book called End of Poverty. And he is universally considered as the father of the Millennium Development Goal. So from growth to equity to liberal democracy, the fourth extremely important idea that struck very, very deep roots was the concern for sustainable development. Professor Tripathi
alluded to that in our opening remarks. So the fourth very, very important idea that came out of Jeffrey Sachs' writing, starting with End of Poverty, was the idea of sustainable development. He was also very, very keen that aid should be an instrument of development. All of you friends, if you have a pen and paper, please try to take notes. Aid as an instrument for development. So, therefore, just see the wonderful lines that Jeffrey Sachs wrote. He said, our greatest illusion is that a healthy society can be built on mindless pursuit of wealth. So it's a wonderful line. This is what he wrote in his book, Price of Inequality, which was published in 2011. Very, very few people know about this wonderful, thin book, Price of Inequality by Jeffrey Sachs. So this was the sharpest indictment against the mindless wealth creation pursuit, which was championed by Adam Smith about 200 years back. We come to the fifth very, very major idea, which is what this lecture is all about, the idea of development. You know, when we talk of development, we always associate it with Professor Amartya Sen, you know, and his Human Development Index. But as I was rummaging through my old notes, I found that the first person who provided the intellectual ballast to development was Denis Goulet. Goulet was like an economic philosopher. You know, now for Goulet, there were two things. One was life sustenance, which is basically your basic needs like housing, food, and healthcare and education. But, you know, a very, very important concept came out of Goulet, which is what I've called self-esteem. The feeling that you are not dependent on anybody, you know, the concept of self-esteem. So three concepts are very, very important for Goulet: life sustenance, self-esteem, and freedom. Freedom, particularly from ignorance and squalor. So very, very wonderful idea from Goulet. And the two persons who carried this idea, you know, beyond this pursuit of wealth, money, exports, foreign exchange reserves, the two economists who really took it forward was the Pakistani economist Maqbul Haq, who became Pakistan's finance minister. He was the chief economist at the World Bank. He wrote a wonderful book. The name of the book is rarely people read this book, Reflections on Human Development. Reflections on Human Development. It was written in 1995 by Maqbul Haq. And Amartya Sen has acknowledged in one of his recent writings that the Human Development Index, the matrix that he prepared, was largely based on the work of Maqbul Haq. You know, I cannot think of a better intellectual synergy between an Indian economist and a Pakistani economist than this, you know, between Maqbul Haq and Amartya Sen. It's a wonderful story of two economists who admired each other, and Amartya Sen saying that he is my intellectual guru. You know, most of the things that he writes. So what is Amartya Sen saying? While he acknowledges Denis Goulet, he coins a very important concept called unfreedoms. You know, unfreedoms. You know, I don't think this English dictionary has a word like unfreedom. He said unfreedoms are things like undernourishment, poor health, basic needs, lack of political freedom, economic insecurity. So these are all unfreedoms. And he also says about Bengal famine that it was a lack of entitlement. Food was not because food was not available. Famine was it was created by human beings. And he considered that democracy provides a very strong safety valve. So the idea that comes out of these three wonderful writings, Goulet, Maqbul Haq, and Amartya Sen, development as a precursor to freedom and self-esteem. So that's the fifth idea. So wealth, equity, liberal democracy, sustainable development, and development as a precursor to complete freedom and human fulfillment. I have a few, summary from Amartya Sen's wonderful book, Freedom as Development. I don't know how, about 5 years back, when I was looking for this book from Modern Book Depot, so he mentioned to me that not a single book is available because the Chinese have put an order for 10 million books. Very interesting nugget. This book went out of market in 2012 because the Chinese suddenly developed, suddenly found that there was so much to learn out of this wonderful book. Now, I thought that there are a few nuggets all of you must take note of. The first thing which Amartya Sen is trying to say, he is basically disputing the utilitarian perspective of John Stuart Mill, Bentham, and Bosanquet. The utilitarian perspective that if happiness of the greatest number, he said, when we are talking of the utility philosophy, we are neglecting the distributional aspect, distributional indifference, and neglect of rights and freedom. I personally find that this is a very, very remarkable contribution of Amartya Sen, that distributive justice is nowhere. If you read the works of John Stuart Mill, Bosanquet, and Bentham, you do not find any mention of distributive justice. And very interestingly, he also is very, very critical of John Rawls, who wrote a wonderful book, The Idea of Justice, where, Amartya Sen says, without really being very bitter, but there are very interesting references to John Rawls. He says that I'm amazed that Rawls gives higher priority to liberty over basic economic needs. Very, very important, man. Very, very important. He says that for John Rawls, liberty takes precedence over basic human needs. He said it cannot be the case. He said basic human needs are required for self-esteem, for survival. Freedom has no meaning without this. So therefore, he and John Drage, who is behind bars, one of the most wonderful economists that India is fortunate to have, father of Right to Food Act, father of Manrega, both of them have written that economic liberalization, about which I'll be talking in another 5 minutes, economic liberalization could have been far more productive if it had supported, given opportunity to the poorer sections of the society. And if we had given higher weightage to human capability development. As a student of economics and of social science, I personally find that one of the biggest failures of our political masters has been inadequate investment in quality education and healthcare. There can be absolutely no doubt if you read the history of countries like China, South Korea, and Taiwan. The defining story has been their huge investment after independence on education and health. I was reading about South Korea. They earmarked close to 30% of their budget for almost 15 years. So if you find Korea's per capita income almost 5 times that of India, this is not because of any who doing it, but because of their conscious spending in the social sector, human development capability. And there's a very interesting 2 lines that Amartya Sen writes at the end of Freedom as Development. He quotes William Cowper. He says, development has 1,000 charms to show that slaves, however contented, will never know. So this is how development, this is how, so the 5 ideas that that I talked of have spun over the years from 1776. Let me now try to measure development. So when we try to measure development, we have essentially 2 very important indicators. One is the Human Development Indices, which Professor Sundar Tripathi mentioned. It has three components: the per capita income, then the life expectancy, and the mean years of schooling. So what basically Amartya Sen has done, he is trying to fuse growth with health and education. Nothing less. So health, education, good health, good education with per capita income. That's it. That is how the Human Development Index has been developed. In 2010, 10 years later, you have another very wonderful index which has been developed by UNDP, which is called the Gender Inequality Index, which is a combination again of three parameters. Maternal mortality rate, that means how many women die in a lakh due to childbirth because of complete neglect of the medical system. Female labor works participation, what is the percentage of women who are in the workforce? And third, what is the percentage of women who are in the parliament? So I intend to dwell on these two parameters today. So one is the Human Development Index, and the other is the Gender Inequality Index. And I intend to compare it globally as the following tables will show. Now, so friends, are you all getting me, friends? Hello? Are you all getting me? Are
Yes,
you all,
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Are you, Gautam,
Yes, sir.
are you with me? Yeah, Gautam?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Totally
So
convenient.
now, yeah. Now let us take a country like Germany, completely shattered during Second World War. And what is their mean years of schooling, Gautam? Is about 14. And life expectancy is 81. And per capita income is more than $35,000. And they have a score of how much? About 95, around 95. Korea, I mentioned South Korea, about the huge investment that they have made. They have a score of 90 plus. And look at their schooling, 12.2. And per capita income, of course, is significantly higher. Let's come to China. China doesn't have a very high human development index, largely because the mean years of schooling is not comparable to the kind of mean years of schooling. So therefore, you find that in their manufacturing items, most of them are of a semi-skilled nature. Toys, small items, but whereas Korea, you find in electronics and shipbuilding, they have really taken a head start. Coming to India, our life expectancy is 70, which is reasonably good. But I think the most appalling thing about us has been the mean years of schooling, which is around 6.5. Per capita income, of course, is low. And our score is about 64. This is all about the Human Development Index. I come to the other very important index, which I consider to be very, very important. Because, if you have neglected 50% of our society, your human development also comes down very, very significantly. So what is this gender inequality index? Now, as I said, when I started, it is a composite of three parameters. First is the maternal mortality rate. Gautam, how many women die out of 1 lakh in Norway? Gautam, just about 2.
Just sir,
only 2. Germany, it is 7. Japan, it is 5. It is a national news. If a woman dies because of medical neglect, they will haul you over the coals. Look at India, it is 133. 133 out of 1 lakh. So China, just see, 29. They have done reasonably well. Share of seats in the parliament, you can see Norway again leads the list about 40%. USA is not particularly great, about 24%. Japan is not particularly great. It continues to be a male chauvinist society. I understand those who stay in Japan, they tell me that it may be a very prosperous country, but men expect their women to work at home. So therefore, you do not find many women in the parliament. Japan is just about 14.5, and China it is quite 25%. Very active. Women are very active in parliament. India, of course, is stuck. The unlucky 13, and but the more important thing is the last column. Ma'am, if you could have a look, labor force participation. Now, what is the labor force participation, say, in a country like Brazil? What is the percentage of women? About 54%. And what is the percentage of men who are participating? 74. Just see the Brazil. 54% women and 74% men. What about India? What is the labor force participation? 20.5%. And male participation is how much? How much, ma'am? 76%. The point I'm trying to highlight through this table, which is from the Human Development Report, latest Human Development Report 2020, is that both in terms of labor force participation, representation in the parliament, and women's mortality, maternal mortality, is extremely high. And that's the reason our gender inequality is almost 45%. It used to be about 50%. What about Norway, Gautam? How much is it? Just 4.5%. Just 4.5%, 0.05. Germany, just 8%. Very little. There is a difference, but it is very minimal. Very minimal. Whereas in case of India, China has a fairly good record, about 17%. China has a better record than USA in gender inequality. Very interesting. You see, data can be extremely revealing. You know, you don't have to take all your students from journalism. I thought I'll mention to them, ma'am, that please do not take an a priori position. You know, just because USA is highly developed doesn't necessarily mean that it is better in terms of gender inequality or gender sensitivity. No, they could be less sensitive than a country like China. So data has to be seen very carefully. And as you could see very clearly, that we are not doing well on any of these fronts. I come to another very important issue. I'm extremely concerned about this particular issue, which I call it the Global Hunger Index. Now, this is something which is very close to my heart. I've written very strongly on this. Now, as far as the Global Hunger Index report of India is concerned, what is most painful is that India is home to 1/3 of the stunted children. Out of 125 million children who are stunted, India is home to 50 million stunted children. Stunting is a phenomenon where you have people with a low height for their age. And this is largely due to 3 factors. There have been wonderful studies on this. This is because of 3 things. One is anemic mothers. If the mothers are anemic, the adolescent girl is anemic. And the report very clearly shows that almost 50% of the adolescent girls and mothers today are anemic. Second is recurring poor diet. And third is unfavorable environment, living environment. So 3 things. Now a child would be susceptible to stunting. The chances of being stunted is very high if the mother is anemic, which is the case in 50% of the cases, and you are subjected to recurring poor diet, and the environment, living environment, is extremely unhygienic and unsatisfactory. And very sadly, the other aspect, despite your integrated child development scheme, your Anganwadis, lack of adequate protein, vitamin, and micronutrients affect development of the brain irreversibly. There's a wonderful book by Partha Dasgupta you know, very, very wonderful book. So here he says that the development of a brain of a child is almost 90% by the time the child becomes 3. He says 1,000 days, the first 1,000 days, the brain of a child develops 90%. And for the development of the brain, they require adequate amount of protein, vitamins, and the micronutrients. Now, successive reports have said that almost 50% of our children suffer from lack of protein, adequate protein, vitamins, and micronutrients. And Professor Dasgupta, Partha Dasgupta writes that if you do not give them adequate protein, micronutrients, and vitamins, then the damage to the brain is irreversible. I have seen many cases that, many times we think that they are dumb. It's not the case. Now, subsequently, if after the age of 5 or 7, you give a child good eggs, a lot of milk, the brain cannot be improved significantly. This has been, so therefore, the point which I'm trying to make to all of you students and all my colleagues, that nutrition has an extremely, extremely important role to human development capability. If you find somebody stunted, dim-wit, it is not because they have been born like this, because we haven't provided the necessary wherewithal to make their brains normal. It's a sad situation, but this is the stark reality. So therefore, the POSAN scheme which Prime Minister Modi has unveiled in 2018, I must compliment him for that. So therefore, one of the focus of the Indian government has been how to reduce stunting. India is one of the, one of the few countries which is in the bottom 10 of the list of the Global Hunger Index as far as stunting goes. So basically, the idea is to reduce it from 35% to 25%. Now, this is the Global Hunger Index in different parts of the world. As you can see, Africa, south of Sahara, very, very high. South Asia also quite high, compared to about 8%, 5%, 10, less than 10% in Europe, Latin America. So therefore, so this is the situation. I come to, so having defined development, having major development, now I come to my Bharat, Mera Bharat Mahan, how my great Indian country has done. And I have taken for my frame of reference the post-economically liberalized India. My thrust has been to see how we have done by becoming a market economy. All of us who old timers, we were fed on a diet of socialism, classless society. So let me see how we have done. So very interestingly, friends, I was present in the Parliament gallery when Dr. Manmohan Singh in the Parliament on 11 July 1991, he quoted Victor Hugo, and he said that no one can stop a moment whose time has come. So this was Victor Hugo. He talked about the French Revolution, which is to come. And so Dr. Manmohan Singh said that the time of India has come to move away from socialism to free market mechanism. So now the backdrop of this was that we had very, very precarious foreign exchange reserve situation. It could cater for only 15 days of import. We had very, very high fiscal deficit. It was around 10%, which is now the situation in India during the pandemic. The fiscal deficit that we have today was the fiscal deficit in 1989. I was telling somebody that people don't discuss 89, but we had a fiscal pandemic in 1989. So very, very high levels of fiscal deficit. very low levels of foreign exchange reserves. And Professor Raskrishna, who taught me in Delhi School of Economics, used to say that India is destined to have a Hindu rate of growth, which is 3.5%. So he says you do whatever you feel like, but India will be stuck like the fatalism of Hindus. He used to say that we are stuck at 3.5%. So in 1991, thanks to the political leadership and backing of Dr. Narasimha Rao and the wonderful combination of Dr. Manmohan Singh as the finance minister, we moved from license permit quota Raj to what we call as liberalization, privatization, and globalization. So very interestingly, LPG has been substituted by another LPG. From license, permit, and quota, we have now gone to liberalization, privatization, and globalization. So what are the few thoughts on economic liberalization? I don't want to make it too much of an economics lecture. So lower tax rate, much lower tax rates, both personal taxes, indirect taxes, banking reforms. We brought in the private banks, multinational banks, very liberal foreign direct investment, dismantling of planning commission during the Mr. Modi's first 5-year term. And we are also thinking of privatizing Air India. So these are some of the very, very interesting pointers to the fact that India is on a firm course of market reforms. So what is the basic objective? What is the basic objective of the government? To place second fiddle to the private sector and create conducive environment for the private sector. So this is extremely, extremely important to note that from the public sector, which Nehru called as the temples of modern India, while he was laying the foundation stone of Vakranangal multipurpose dam, he said that this dam is not a multipurpose dam. It is the temple of modern India. So from the temples of modern India, today the role of the government is to create, to propitiate the private sector. Now, what has happened in India because of this? This is extremely, extremely important. How do we look at Dr. Mishra? At the story of India's growth. He was my first boss when I went to Delhi in 1976. Nitin Desai was my first boss. So I'm tempted. I have, madam, I've put his picture. It is my respect for writes extremely well. Please do read Business Standard whenever Nitin Desai has a column. Nobody can be as laconic, as precise, and less boring as an economist like Nitin Desai. Generally economists don't write well. They're not very readable. Unlike men of literature, history, political science. So they, barring a few, maybe Amartya Sen, Keynes used to write extremely well, exceptionally well. But Nitin Desai also writes well. So now let us look at the figures. Agriculture, sir, Dr. Mishra, it was around 38% in 77. Now it is around 16-17%. Obviously, agriculture has declined in its contribution importance. And very interestingly, during the pandemic, I thought I'll just mention to you, ma'am, this sector, which was the most neglected sector, has become the flag bearer of the Indian economy. If today we have a bumper crop, we don't talk about food scarcity. It is this sector, this agricultural sector, which has provided India's dignity in terms of food. People talk of only Dr. Swaminathan, but even after Dr. Swaminathan, please believe me, this has been the most neglected, but the most powerful, most important contributor to India's self-respect. I thought I'll just share with you, ma'am. When I was a student in the school, in 1965, so we used to get milk powder, thanks to PL 480. It started with Kennedy. So they used to dump their surplus milk powder on India. And my father, who was our headmaster, so he used to convert it to gulab jamun, you know, and all of us used to get a gulab jamun during lunchtime, you know. And then Johnson said, he said, stop PL480. Sastry was the prime minister. And I remember the first thing my father said, no more gulab jamuns from tomorrow. So from that servitude of waiting for gulab jamuns who didn't come from US, today, India doesn't have to depend on France or Russia for food grains. So India is self-sufficient. But economic liberalization certainly has brought down the importance of agriculture as a sector. Industry, the share remains the same. You know, this is one area, Dr. Mishra, I thought I'd just mention to you. One of the sad stories of India is its stagnant industry, stagnant manufacturing. Whether you take South Korea, you take China, you take Japan, you take Germany, the reason why they have done better than India is because they invested more handsomely into manufacturing, to industry. And industry has a lot of scope for employment. It generates a lot of employment. Agriculture cannot employ more. You have disguised employment. Too many people are already there. So industry. So we have lost out the opportunity to employ our people effectively. And the third sector, ma'am, I thought I'll just mention to all of you, is the services sector, which has really been dented now in pandemic, particularly hotels, your civil aviation, your food courts, all of them are closed today. But this has been the sector which has seen the most significant increase in terms of contribution to GDP. But very interestingly, it has not contributed to employment to the extent industry would have done. This is something which I thought all of you must keep a note of, that if India had developed its manufacturing sinews better, it would have had much better employment profile than is the case with the services, because services essentially leans on people who are highly educated, and it really cannot absorb too many people. You cannot have 5 people working on a laptop, you know, it has to be 1-to-1, you know, but industry has much. Export and import has increased very significantly. But very interestingly, private sector investment, ma'am, you can see has increased from 1.5% to 11%. I said in the last slide that the private sector has really become the signing sector, and the growth has become from 3.5%, from Raj Krishna's 3.5% average growth rate, we are clocking around 7%. I'm not talking about the present pandemic, but if you take the period between 2000 to 2016, the average economic growth would be around 7%. Now let us see a very, very interesting slide. All of you please pay a little attention. I'm very, very fond of this particular presentation. One of the papers that I had written had this table. Now this is the glorious, very glorious story of what we call as jobless growth. You know, now let us see, for instance, take 2004 to 2009. Ma'am, if you see 2004 to 2009, how much has been the growth, ma'am? About 8.5%, 8.7%. Can you all see? Friends, Karthik, can you see that? Karthik, can you respond?
Yes, sir.
How much is the growth in from 2004 to 2009? How much is the growth? 8.7%. Can you see that bar?
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
8 points. And what has been the growth in employment?
0.1.
So 0.1.
0.1. Go into 2000 to 2011. Same story. So growth is huge, largely because of the service sector. But as I said, employment has not been commensurately going up with a reference to growth. So this is a very, very important pointer to the policymakers. All of you who are educated, this is a study by the National Sample Survey Organization. Can you see between 2004 to 2005 to 2017-18, the unemployment percentage, forget about the uneducated people, the unorganized sector, about which Arun Kumar writes enormously, copiously. I'm talking of the educated unemployed, like people like you and me. Rural male has increased from 3.9 to 17.4. Urban male. So every area you'll find that whenever you do an analysis as a journalist, we always think that, okay, India has 94% in the unorganized sector, they are uneducated, but this is the most disturbing part of the unemployment scenario. Let me come to the villages. Gandhi said India lives in the villages. What is happening in the villages? This is a report from the socio-economic caste census report. Karthik, how much is the landless casual labor? About 38%. Illiterates, 36%. And people owning, having income of less than 5,000 is how much? Around 74%. And very interestingly, poverty and mobiles are not inversely related, but positively related. Even so, I remember many of my guys. So they would be having one mobile in hand and one mobile in the. So suddenly, if the mobile rings in the home, I said, "Kiska hai?" Sir, madam ka hai. So see, all of us carry two. So mobile, 68%. And Kisan cards, what is the percentage of people who are having Kisan cards which give them access? Just about 4%. So therefore, if you really look at the rural area, 75% see the illiteracy, lack of access to agricultural credit, and their income is less than a skilled labor. So this is the story of. Now, what does the Constitution expects? Let's get back to our Constitution. I'm extremely keen about going back to my roots. This is the main preamble for me. This is the main leitmotif for me to judge how the country is doing. I'm not bothered who is at the helm of power. I am only bothered this sacrosanct Constitution. How is the government doing with a reference to these expectations? So what are the expectations? Socio-economic justice. This is part of your preamble. You should provide socio-economic justice to all. In 1976, you added a new clause, 38(2), where you said that you should minimize inequality of income. Just think of this, minimize income inequality. Article 47, you said I should raise the level of nutrition. I'm showing this because earlier I had shown India's global hunger index, if you remember, stunting. Raise the level of nutrition, Article 47. Article 45 says that early childhood care and education is the responsibility of the state. Let's not forget that this is a constitutional mandate. This is not a scrap of paper. It is a commitment of the government in power to the people that has elected. Article 39, distributive justice. You cannot have concentration of wealth. And then finally, what bothers me very much is that the preamble also talks about promoting fraternity and also brotherhood, transcending religious diversity. Very, very important. I'm not going to spend any time, but you understand the implication that I'm talking of. So therefore, in a nutshell, the Constitution says that we should take care of our children from the age of 0 to 4, improve nutrition, provide distributive justice, and also minimize inequality of income. Let's see how we have done. It's a wonderful, wonderful slide. This came out in the Economist. This is from the World Inequality report. Now, Karthik, you tell me in 1951, the bottom 50%, what was their share of income? Bottom 50%, how much was the share of income?
Around 20%, sir.
So, ma'am, in 1951, when the first plan was made, all of us have read about it, the bottom 50% of India's population had a share of 20% in the national income. How much is it in 2014, Karthik?
It's dropped down to around 15%.
So from 20% share, the poor has become poorer. Can we say that? All of you are here. I'm not trying to having any figment of imagination. Now let us look at the middle income group. How much is it, Karthik, in 1951? The middle 40%. How much?
It was around 45% in 1950s.
About 40 to 43%. How much is now?
It has dropped to 30%.
The middle class has also suffered during this period. They had really improved in the 80s. If you can see that, in the 80s, there was a slight improvement, ma'am. If you can see, the middle class, their share had gone up a little bit, but then from 80, after economic liberalization, the middle class, I can say, has become lower middle class. From a 42% share, it is now 30%. Let me look at the top 10. How much is it, Karthik? How much was it in 1951? What was the share?
Around 38 to 40% it was in 1950s.
And how much is it now?
It has gone up to more than 55%.
So the top 10, all of you please keep a note. The top 10 who control around 38% of national income now control 55%. The middle 40%, which controlled 43%, is down to 30%. But the saddest part is the bottom 50%, which had a share of 20%, are down to 15%. So what is the income inequality reduction that we are talking of? So income inequality has actually accentuated. So therefore, that's a promise we have made in 1976, but we are not able to implement that. Let me come to nutritional status. I've already mentioned the Global Hunger Index. This is a report by the Government of India. This is the National Health Family Survey. 23% women are below body mass index. Vitamin deficiency lead to blindness. All this I have already mentioned, iodine deficiency. So all this is a litany of difficulties, the litany of deprivation which children are suffering. This is the percentage of stunted, wasted, underweight, which is not really reducing much. But I'm most distressed by this particular pie chart. Most distressed. I mentioned in the Global Hunger Index that one of the primary reasons for stunting is because of anemic women. So the rapid survey of children, which was done in 2014, ma'am, you'll be surprised to know that this report was discussed in Niti Aayog just once. I sent a letter to Niti Aayog saying what is the follow-up of this report. Now you see here that 44% of your adolescent girls are severely anemic, severely deficient, and about 19% are moderately thin. They are not thin out of choice. It is thin out of deprivation. So close to 62%, you can say 2/3 of your adolescent girls are thin, not out of choice, but because of a constant neglect by the state to realize its mandate of Article 47. As against this, the deficiency percentage of boys, for your information, is 28%. 62% for girls and 28% for boys. You know, gender inequality, when we talk of, let me not dwell on why this happens, you know, So the preference of mothers for boys, and this was not a thing of the past. It continues. I see it in most family household. It's a very sad commentary of our society. But the fact remains that we have really done very poorly. I come to some of the last part, which is on the education. Now, one of the good things that the Constitution has done is by making right to education a fundamental right. This came after the Unnikrishnan judgment. The Unnikrishnan judgment in 1993 very clearly mentioned that without education, you have no right to life. Right to life is in Article 21. He says there is no right to life if you do not have right to education. And therefore, in 2009, we had right to education as a fundamental right from 6 to 14. Now, the three things which are very important for education, because we are talking of human development, are access, equity, and quality. Very important. Access, that means everybody has universal access. Equity, that means you don't discriminate between a Harijan and an upper caste. You do not discriminate between a Hindu and a Muslim. You don't discriminate between a boy or a girl. India's record in these two aspects has been outstanding. Most of any research article you find in terms of universal access to education and also abdicating gender discrimination, India has a very good, extremely good. By common consent, there could be sporadic evidence of some differences, but by and large, India has achieved the access and equity parameters remarkably well. We have, in fact, these are the two parameters of Millennium Development Goals about which I'll be talking of tomorrow. We have achieved that. But in terms of quality, that remains a real lament. I'll just comment on three aspects now. One is, very interestingly, private school enrollment in 2009, when Right to Education Act was introduced, was only 16%. Now it is 31%. Just see the irony of it. Karthik, just see the irony of it. Before 2009, a poor person's boy or girl did not have a constitutional right to go to school. But today, many poor families send their children to the private schools because they know, my own peer, Ballab, who gets 12,000 rupees, spends 3,000 rupees for sending his girl to the school. I once asked him that, why do you do that? You can send your girl to, he said, no, sir. I said, what is the reason? He said, sir, in the private school, nobody asks my daughter whether she is the daughter of a peon or of a millennial. Self-respect. She wears the same uniform as anybody else. Teachers are far more. And he said, most importantly, my daughter can speak English. She is good at English. So educational outcome is not the only thing. Dignity. None of us, in this elitist position can understand how a poor man feels in a society which is extremely unequal. It's very easy to speak from a pulpit, but unless you really go into the conditions in which they live, you don't understand what indignity really means, what humiliation really means. So the report which the ASCR has prepared, Annual Status of Education Report has prepared, that reading, only 47% children are able to read properly. But the most pathetic thing has been the numeracy skill, arithmetic. Only 28% of the children are able to do a simple division or a subtraction. Class 5 children. Now, very interestingly, this situation is not far better even in private schools. I did a study and I found it is just about 30-35%. for Indian schools. So the last thing I thought I'll just mention is that the NEP, the new educational policy, which was unveiled in 2020, it's a remarkable document. And for the first time, there is a document which says that the early childhood education has really gone for a toss. Really, it has really gone for a complete disaster. While the educational standard between 6 to 14, access, outcome are reasonable, may not be very disastrous, but the new education policy very clearly brings out that between 3 to 6, when the children, about 7 crore children, 70 million children go to the Anganwadis. 70 million children, and they do not have any credible early childhood education. So therefore, one of the good things that the NEP has done, it has said that make early childhood education a fundamental right. Make Article 45 a fundamental right. Very important recommendation. And provide proper nutrition. 2 things. I was really touched by the recommendation. 2 things. Make early childhood education a fundamental right. Improve the nutritional content, nutritional intake of students. Now, this is a very interesting slide. All of us talk about Gujarat versus Kerala. Now you see that, very interesting. You see that. What is the average dropout in Gujarat, Karthik? Average dropout? Between 9 to 10? Around?
24%.
And what about Kerala?
In Kerala, 9%.
Maharashtra?
13%.
Odisha?
9.5%.
This is what Professor Tripathi was mentioning. This is what Professor Tripathi was mentioning. Orissa may be economically much behind Gujarat, but in terms of dropout from children, Orissa really cares. You don't have to be really a developed state to have a low dropout. What about this gross enrollment rate between 11 to 12? What is the percentage in Kerala?
In Kerala, it's 80%.
80% secondary school. 80% of the children are in secondary grade. What about Gujarat?
41%.
Do you see that? Do you see that stark difference? College. What is the situation in Maharashtra?
32%.
Just see Tamil Nadu.
And Tamil Nadu, it's 49%.
You see from the level of discussion in the TV, why they are better. 49% college going in Tamil Nadu. And what is the percentage in Mera great Gujarat Mahan? How much is it?
20%.
20%. Tamil Nadu is better than Kerala. I mean, I was amazed to find that Tamil Nadu is better in terms of gross enrollment. So therefore, when we, so the point which I'm trying to drive home at, is the simple point that do not go by all India numbers that educational outcome is bad, we are not doing well. Some states are really doing well. They are doing well. Kerala is doing well. Maharashtra is doing well. Orissa is doing well. Just see Orissa. It is doing well on secondary education, college education, possibly no. So therefore, whenever we make a study, let's not get foxed or overwhelmed by our all India figure. Get into the interstate numbers, and which is what we'll do tomorrow in our study of SDG. So, and you see wide difference. So I almost end my lecture with a comparison between what existed before economic liberalization in terms of growth and in terms of development. So Karthik, can you tell me the 3 parameters that I've taken? GDP has grown double, saving has grown double, export has grown double. Quite clearly the growth story is quite edifying. But when I look at the human development issues, I'm really worried about the infant mortality, maternal mortality, mean years of schooling, and most importantly, on malnutrition. So therefore, whenever we are trying to make an overall assessment, we have to see this huge disconnect between growth and development. In academic circles, people say that is the Kerala model better or the Gujarat model is better. So I thought I'll make this slide for all of you. The Kerala model basically is based on Amartya Sen's insistence on human development, investing far more in education and health, whereas the Gujarat model has been based on free market. The emphasis has been on economic growth and infrastructure. Now, quite clearly, Kerala has done far better. Gujarat has done far better in terms of infrastructure and industry compared to Kerala. But in terms of no hunger, just see the no hunger figures. No hunger 80% of Kerala. And how much is Gujarat? How much is it? 46%. But very interestingly, I found a very interesting story here. Good health. What is Gujarat's score in this?
76, more than Kerala.
86. Gujarat is 86. And Kerala is 72. Many times, statistics can completely, whenever you are becoming an ideologue, you think that everything in the social sector is better in Kerala. Sorry, they're doing far better in terms of health. Far better. Are you getting my point? So whenever we make an assessment, let us not be purloined by ideological rhetoric. Let's not be overtaken by ideological rhetoric. When you see the facts, they can be very, very surprising and sometimes very, very exciting. So these are some of the thoughts I mentioned about Jeffrey Sachs, John Ridge. But the more interesting comment is by Esther Duflo. She got the Nobel Prize with Abhijit Banerjee. But I consider that she has been one of the most solid economists as far as development economics is concerned. I end with two very interesting personalities. One is Joseph Stiglitz. He's on the left-hand side. And on the other side, I have William Sandel. Both of them, please keep a note, both of them wrote two wonderful books in 2012. Stiglitz wrote Price of Inequality. This is a book which says why US had a financial crisis. The biggest behemoth of economic growth, power, the monolith of power. Why in 2007, 2008, its economy was smashed into smithereens. So Stiglitz writes, it is largely because of the market was unregulated. And he says that market forces do not benefit everybody. I started by saying market forces as if by an invisible hand will benefit all. He says, no, sorry, it only benefits an unscrupulous few. He flagged the importance of greed, conflict of interest. So therefore, wherever market economies are not properly regulated, they will have a financial crisis. So market fundamentalism just doesn't work. But I'm more fascinated by the work of William Sandel. So one of my students presented me a book of William Sandel. He's here. So, but I was more fascinated by this book, Moral Limits of the Market. I think all of you must read this. It's a thin book. Now, what he says, that what are we doing in a market? He finds many schools in US, they are bribing students with $2 to read a book. So he finds that many students are reading the book. So they are able to memorize it. But when somebody asked them a question, critical question on the book, he said, no, I was not asked to understand it. I was asked to memorize it. So $2 to read a book. Jump a queue, whether to buy petrol or to see a Senate proceedings, or you want to have a prison cell upgrade. If you have money, you can have this. You can have an air conditioner. You can see Netflix inside the prison cell. You can get a good cash for good grades. You can pay for it. So he mentions a very interesting thing in this book. I'll just take one more minute. He says that, do you consider a civil duty to have a monetary value? So he compares between UK and US. He said people in US get money for donating blood. But in UK, people donate blood out of charity, out of compassion. They say that if I charge money for giving blood to somebody, I think I am doing a disservice to myself as a human being. So therefore, he says every product cannot be marketed. Every product doesn't have a price. So therefore, he says, Sandel said towards the end, you cannot buy friendship with money. Neither can you possibly buy a Nobel Prize in economics. So he says that this whole thing, that everything has a price, I think is a very fallacious way, a very, very unfortunate way of looking at society. And final thoughts, friends. I look at the whole thing in a more concrete form like this. I think we have to abdicate market fundamentals. That's the first thing I would like to suggest, that this whole concept of free market economy, Frederick von Hayek or Milton Friedman or the great Adam Smith, I don't think it has a relevance. It has to be regulated. Economy has to be properly regulated, and the government cannot be in cahoots with the powers that, with the corporates. The second suggestion I have is that we have to make significantly higher allocation in things like quality education, healthcare, sanitation. We spend just about 5% today. That needs to be increased. But I have a very important thought, which is based on a lot of research writing. It says that if you just focus on growth and you do not focus on specific intervention, that means it is important to intervene in specific sectors like quality education, skilling, healthcare. So that is far, far more important than this constant urge for higher growth. I read a wonderful book by Yehudi Menuhin, the great violinist. So Yehudi Menuhin had written that the world can do with a less of growth and more of happiness. This was Yehudi Menuhin, wonderful writing. He said the world can do with much lesser growth, but much higher human development capability. And the concept of Robert Solow, that if you increase growth, everybody will benefit, hasn't been proved right. This is what he said, rising tide will lift all the boats. So Stiglitz said, sorry, sir, it doesn't happen. Stiglitz was a student of Robert Solow. And he says that if you have a rising tide, which is followed by a storm, it will smash weak boats into smithereens. When Solow wrote that when you have a tide, all the boats will rise, his fundamental assumption was that everybody was equal in the society. Now Stiglitz says that most of the people are quite poor, vulnerable. They are like leaky, weak boats. So therefore, that hand of the government is required, that benevolent hand of the government is required to ensure that they have the benefit of human development. That's the expectation, and that is what the Constitution orders. So for this, political will and priority would be very critical. Very, very critical. The Ujala scheme was a great success because the Prime Minister thought that all the women below poverty line must have access to clean fuel. You know, so therefore, I end by saying that the three pegs that hold a nation are growth, development, and sustainment. I think they're the three very, very important components. This is the tripod of a nation. And to end, let me say that we have done reasonably well in terms of growth. But when it comes to development, I have already mentioned that we have miles to go before you sleep, as Robert Frost said, and miles to go before you sleep. And the second lecture, friends, tomorrow would be on sustainment, you know, the MDG, SDG. And that's all I need to share with all of you. Thank you very much. And I'll be very happy to take questions from all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Very, very good.
Thank you, sir.
Really a very, very interesting lecture, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Many things that I don't know about my students, but I have learned many things from your lecture. And no, you have in your lecture you have mentioned all the diverse perspectives of development, and finally the way to go for all of us. And okay, we are not in policy making, but the way we can express our views certainly will influence policy making. And you have rightly said that ideology or any ideal type model of development will not help us. What is required is, in reality, in a substantive sense, what the people get out of the fruits of development. So it's a wonderful lecture.
Thank you.
And we have a very interesting question from Dipankan Bandopadhyay. He writes that we have floated many derivative fundamental rights, like right to health, right to food, and we have also made these rights justiciable. He poses the question, do you think a two-pronged approach, that is strengthening of the legal rights of citizens and the simultaneous development of social infrastructure, is the only way forward? If no, what could be some other strategies to achieve the goals as far as global hunger index is concerned?
There is absolutely no doubt that investing in social infrastructure, basically health, education, sanitation, that has been the defining variable for promoting long-term human development. Ma'am, there is absolutely no doubt. There are undeniable pointers to the fact that those countries which have invested very handsomely in quality education, health, skilling, have ultimately become the winners. There has been no doubt about that. But at the same time, we also need to build up our infrastructure. So this is what we call as economic infrastructure. So we had a wonderful model by Carl Lewis. He says, we must look for balanced development. You know, balanced development means we allow both your economic infrastructure and social infrastructure, which must go hand in hand. And that is where the job of the finance minister of the government is how to prioritize Essentially, this is what Richard Musgrave had mentioned. Allocation. What is your allocation priority? Now, when I study few developing economies like South Korea or even China, and also Scandinavian countries like Sweden and all, you clearly find that they have consistently spent far more allocation of their GDP on these social sectors than has been the case in India. Amartya Sen has been crying hoarse about increasing India's allocation from 3% to 6%. If you remember, ma'am, when the previous first the government, NDA government came, they also said, even the national education policy also says 6%. So therefore, there has to be a look. So to answer to Dipankar's question, it has to have two wheels. The chariot has to have two wheels. So they have to move together. And those countries which have given priority to social sectors, skilling, they have done far better than countries who have only been obsessive about economic growth, as has been the case with India. That's the sad commentary, whether it was the Congress before or even the present government. I do find that we have, so on the other hand, you find that Orissa has been quite good on this, on the social sector concerns about food, about self-help groups. I think in many indicators I'll show tomorrow, we have done extremely well. We have done reasonably well than many other countries. I remember, ma'am, whenever you used to go for an interview to the UPSC, the question used to be that why is Orissa so poor, despite having so many mineral resources? And, we used to be bracketed with Bihar in terms of poverty. But if you see the data now, the story is completely different. And that's largely because of the priority which the government has given to social sector. You can always say populism, but I think it's more than populism. It's more than populism. I keep on saying that when MG Ramchandran, ma'am, you would be knowing, he introduced the midday meal scheme. Almost all the MLAs said that this fellow is launching this scheme for bagging votes. But that has become the flagship program for children. And as you know, that one of the missing links today in pandemic has been the midday meal for the poor children. Though government says that they are trying to reach out, ration and all, but that has been one of the major factors for improving, bringing down absenteeism. So Dipankar, I think it is not here or there. It has to be done together, and that's the job of the political parties. As an economist or as a political scientist, I can say that you must put priority, but it is up to them how they apportion the budget.
Thank you so much, sir. That answers.
Thank you very much.
Another participant, sir, Devasis Maharana, who is a first-year student in our department.
Wonderful, Devasis. Good morning to you, Devasis. Good afternoon.
Even this is my question also. I wanted to ask you.
Can everybody have the video on? Can I see them at least once? Ma'am, one direction. Just once we can take a photograph. So at least I can see all of you. Just once. Just once. Just once.
He asked that you have given us a graph, sir, where it shows that during 1980 to 83, there was rise in income of individuals, middle class and the lower class and the top class. And suddenly it came down in the 3-4 years, and the income of the top class has increased. So he wants to know what could be the reasons are for all these contradictions.
It's a very, very good question. I don't want to give an offered answer on this. One of the reasons could be, I'll tell you, one of the reasons could be that the tax rate on the middle income groups, both of us, has suddenly become quite high for the middle income groups. See, I pay a tax rate of 30%, and the Ambanis also pay 30%. I find it patently unfair, patently unfair. So I keep on thinking about Thomas Piketty, So why can't we have much higher tax rate for the super rich, And most of the evidences show that, So to answer your question, in fact, there's a wonderful chapter by Joseph Stiglitz in his book Price of Inequality. Now, his mother was a teacher. He said, when I was growing up as a child, I used to find my mother very comfortable. So she was separated from her husband when Stiglitz was very small. And he said she was very comfortable. We had a very comfortable time. But he said, when I went to college, I found that she was very hard up. And so I found out that when I started as a child, Franklin D. Roosevelt, my mother was paying 5% as tax. And when Ronald Reagan became the president, she was paying 20%. So that's for justice, So therefore, the middle class had become, much poorer, So the tax policy of the government also is extremely, extremely important. I tend to think that the middle class has not really benefited much. Say, for instance, the tax relief that the SMEs were given from 30% to 25%. I find no one good reason why the middle class couldn't have been given 5% reduction, and the upper income groups, the super rich, couldn't have been imposed 40 to 45%. So I think this is a very wonky priority that the government has. I think it's a very misguided priority, misguided tax policy, where we are trying to favor the rich, bringing down the income of the top corporates tax rate from 35% to 25%, and not looking at the middle class. I think it's a very flawed way of looking at tax policy. So Devasis, I don't think beyond this, possibly the tax rate could be the reason, and this could be the reason. I mean, at least as a middle class person, I can say that I was worse off much later than I was in the 80s. I purchased a car in the 80s, but now it's difficult to maintain it properly. So I would say that.
Another question that came to my mind.
Yeah.
Why is it that there is so less enrollment in the college level in higher education? Whether it is in Gujarat or in Kerala or in Maharashtra, where at the secondary level they have more, but at the higher education level it is less.
I think, ma'am, it is a very important question. You would have seen that from almost 2000, the government has abdicated the higher education sector to the private sector. You hardly find any growth in the government universities, so you'll find that as a public policy, I think we have gone by the Birla-Ambani report of 2000. I don't know whether it's a very important report which was submitted in 1999 to Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee. So there the report very clearly says that you please hand over the higher education sector to us, provide us land on a lease basis. And this is not the sector. I remember at that time there was a hue and cry, and Vajpayee was very, very politically astute. But I think the seeds of privatization of university started from that report, 1999. And if you just read that report, it makes a wonderful, wonderful reading. So I have nothing against privatization of universities, but I think at the same time, neglect of public sector university has been a real pathetic story of India, except for a few national universities which find it difficult to spend money. When I go to my own alma maters, Utkal University and all, I find that even the basic infrastructure and all suffer very, very poorly. So therefore, so in India, so to answer your question, most of the private, so one is of course this lack of investment by government in the government university. The other thing is the private universities are only investing in technical education. You'll find that even in KIT University, I don't have a school for humanities, for graduation, post-graduation. So, so there is a huge neglect of the social science stream, which is not the case with the government universities. So the private sector are more keen to see management, technical education, law, medical. These are the sectors which will face jobs, which would be far more paying. And so there is a very imbalanced development also of universities. So despite several judgments by the Supreme Court that the universities are not for profiteering, the story of Indian education is completely different. If you higher education after 2000 is completely different. They may be doing it as a development fee, but it is a capitation under name. I mean, I'm sorry, so that I think is very unfortunate. The kind of money that we have. So many people are not able to afford it also. If you are asking for 12 lakhs for 3 years and all, so I think it is unaffordable. So it's very difficult, very, very difficult. So that is one of the reasons. I think, so to answer a point, I think we need to spend a little more on government education. I think I can't give the university college sector to the private sector. Let them do. But I think the government cannot, that has been my experience.
Another question, because the second year student, master student, he asked,
yes,
if there is a pandemic, and like
yes,
now we are having, how can we make access to education sustainable?
It's a wonderful question. In fact, the ACR report, yes, ma'am. The ACR report, which has come in February 2021, it clearly finds out that that about 23% of the parents, to answer your question, because 23% of the parents of children are uneducated in India. And the study clearly finds out that almost none of them would avail of online education. They didn't have smartphones, they don't have connectivity. So we are talking of about 18 million children, 18 million children who are not part of this online process, which we are now going through. So there's a huge digital divide, and the pandemic has further accentuated it. There was always a digital divide, normal times, but at least the children didn't have to suffer the digital divide in a normal situation. At least they could attend a school or a college or the university. But today, this access to technology is not available to a very large number of students. And if it is available, also the lines are not particularly stable. The infrastructure is quite bad. You talk of digital India, but I think in terms of infrastructure, in terms of connectivity, there are serious issues. So I tend to think, ma'am, that the pandemic has accentuated the digital divide. So if you want an answer to this, UP government, very interestingly, tried to provide tablets to about 20 million children. 20 million children. The difficulty with this tablet was there are not adequate number of teachers. You go to several places, you'll find tablets with the children, but there are no teachers to teach. The net is not working. So it's just not a question of just buying a few things, giving computers and tablets to students, but you need to do a handholding by empathetic teachers, stable infrastructure. So a whole host of things go with it. So I think it's nobody really knows how learning has been affected. But my sense as a professor, as a teacher, has been that it has been hugely affected. There's a very interesting story from Sweden. Very interesting, very high on the HDI. So, ma'am, I'll send that link to you. It says that the poorer sections of the society, the learning outcomes has been 55% less than the richer parents. This study basically shows that those children who are in the lower income bracket, they are learning during the pandemic. They have taken about 6 months, has been 55% students are much less than the learning outcomes. Even in a country like Sweden, where they provided tablets and all. So therefore, importance of, the parents being educated, having a very stable network in infrastructure, and most importantly, empathetic teachers. I very strongly believe that unless you have good quality teachers, that I think is the critical thing. I want to pay you a compliment. All of you are here since Mr. Tripathi would be retiring next month. I knew her, invited her in 2013 to teach political thought. So before she came, I had an arrogance that I know political thought extremely well because I had taken political thought as one of my papers in the IS. So I sat in her class and she was teaching Plato, So after that class, I have no hesitation in saying, I realized what knowledge is all about. Plato says, what is honored in a country will be cultivated there. I mean, very, very important lines. What is honored in a country will be cultivated there. And ma'am, I must thank you that, however good you may be in a subject, unless you have cut your teeth in that subject for a long while, as you have, or as I have, say for instance, economics. And the most important thing I must compliment you is that you are fostering a spirit of interdisciplinary learning. Ma'am, I must tell you that we as students of the 70s, for us, learning was in silos. You are either an expert in economics or political science or sociology, that's it. But today, sir, Dr. Pratik, sir, today, unless you have an interdisciplinary approach, one of the things I must say, patting my own feet, when I went to law school, I learned the Constitution. Today, I am able to see how economics has to synergize with the constitutional expectation. It is just not a piece of paper which Ambedkar has left as a bequest. It is an emotive appeal to all of us as teachers, responsible citizens, to take those ideals forward. Shared prosperity is not a question of pious platitudes by a pliant government. So therefore, governance, public administration, that accountability is at a discount. And for heaven's sake, we must not abdicate the merit goods sector, which is education, health and all, just for private sector. Believe me, Dr. Mishra, the poor would be the most vulnerable in this. They just won't be able to even avail a bottle of water. You can say, Chidambaram may say that, it is there available for 10 rupees. But that guy doesn't have 10 rupees. He doesn't have 1 rupee. He counts coins. For you, coins may be a discomfiture. For him, it is a fact of life. So I think so government must not, I must not give up on government universities. We cannot give up on quality. And most importantly, all students of journalism and all students of public administration, please remember, interdisciplinary approach is the way forward. If Amartya Sen scores over most other economists, it is because of his understanding of philosophy and economics. If Keynes was ahead of his times, it was because of his wonderful understanding of global politics with the nitty-gritty of economics. He also played the piano, he could paint. People like Bertrand Russell used to befriend him. So they were complete men. They were not hollow men. They were not unidimensional people, So they were not one-dimensional people, What is required today, Dipankan, is that we should see there is no, there is no hierarchy of knowledge that technology is better than economics or economics is better than public administration. Those things have become completely irrelevant. It is a world where we have to look at each other and look at it with objectivity, and ideas are very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mishra. I'm humbled by your appreciation.
No, Bhagyasri is here. Bhagyasri, I have taught, I had the good fortune of spending some time with her. Thank you, Bhagyasri, for being here. Yeah.
Sir, I just have one idea which I want to share with you. I don't know whether it is practical or not.
Yes, tell me, ma'am.
We need, you were talking about the students, the deprivation of the students not having a tab. But even if they have a tab, it takes time to learn how to use the tab.
Absolutely.
For the students. And take for example, the scenario for the teachers. Even the teachers in India they are not tech savvy.
Absolutely.
So what I thought in this scenario, no, the last 1 year I'm thinking about this. What could be a practical solution? Is it possible that the government should have intervened in the process, should have developed quality content for the primary level, for the secondary level, for the upper primary level,
Absolutely.
and also for the college level, which could be aired through YouTube or through the television. Television
Absolutely.
is the common medium.
Absolutely.
Which could have saved the children from using the computer for a longer period.
Absolutely.
Certainly it will have impact on their health, their eyesight, their hearing ability and all. So I think the government should prepare itself. If at all we have a pandemic in the future, the state should make itself prepared, keeping all these things in mind, how to go about in disseminating knowledge to the kids, to the upper primary students, to the secondary students, not
Absolutely.
through a Android mobile or not through a tab. Distributing tabs to 20 million children is just a matter of populism. It is not at all going to solve the children. Somebody who is a senior fellow in the family must be using that tab, not the poor kid. So I don't know whether I'm practical or not.
No, you are absolutely practical.
Come to me during this pandemic when I think about the access to education of the poor children. Now another question is there, sir. It's a very interesting question posed by a journalism student. He says why the percentage of female workforce participation has declined over the years.
I think
today it is not a part of our discussion, but
no. I'll answer that specifically. There is a wonderful study by the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. Last year they did this study. Why the labor force participation has come down from close to 28% to 20% now. One of the primary reasons they find is that, the agricultural sector, ma'am, the female workforce participation used to be much, much higher than the male workforce participation.
Yes.
Now, with increasing tractorization, with increasing mechanization, with the threshers coming in, they find that many states have replaced female workforce with machines. This is one of the reasons they find, CMI finds, that the female workforce participation has come down. There is also, many times, people say that, even this good maternity relief that the present government gives, they say it also acts as a disincentive for women to get a job. Many good companies, they do not hire girls, when they find that, she's in the family way, so that those issues are also there, and it's also a fact that in the pandemic, I do find that there is a huge pressure on women at home, I just want to share with you, yesterday at night when I was going out around 8:30, I found from many homes, men shouting at women saying that the food is not good, So I was very, 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 very depressed by this, So things are quite bad, As such, men do not spend enough time in homework, in sharing the burden, and they post in the Facebook if they're wiping the floor or cleaning some dishes, as if they're not supposed to do that, So it's a very sad commentary, the way you look at your own gender counterpart. So it's a very sad thing. But the specific thing is mechanization in agriculture is one of the reasons given by the CMI. So that is that.
Another question Bhagyashree has put up.
She was my student. She was my student, I think. Same Bhagyashree, yeah.
She is right now in JNU doing her PhD.
I know.
In South Asia. She has posed a question. Do you think the private sector's contribution in social service delivery would be more paying for us? Will gaining dividends be prioritized by the private sectors over service intentions?
I have been a joint secretary in the Hindustan Aeronautics Limited for about 5 years. I have no hesitation in saying that the private sector would be much better in terms of delivery. They will cost a little more. But if you are able to frame the memorandum of understanding properly, their charter of work, the general experience in India is that they deliver much better. The NGOs have a far better track record, very, very good track record. So you tie them down to good MOUs. I think government must come out to the social sector. Most of them, bureaucrats I know, they are bereft of empathy. Unless there is a danda from the top, they just don't move things. So by and large, very, very apathetic lot in the law and order revenue collection is one kettle of fish. But social sector, Bhagyashree, I am quite clear in the mind, delivery would be far, far better. Far, far better. There is absolutely no doubt. I mean, I'll just give an example to you, Bhagyashree. I mean, you'll understand. My mother-in-law was to get her pension, revised pension. My father-in-law died about 2 years back, and she is to get a revised pension. So it was there in the bank for 3 months, So when I went to the State Bank day for yesterday, so he said, sir, 3 months to hua to kya hua? I mean, she has to come, she has to sign in a bond, So they're completely apathetic, completely. There is no accountability, very little accountability of your private sector, government sector banks. Very little, very, very little. There's no doubt about that. Absolute no doubt.
Here I must share one thing. Right now I'm staying near Sainik School.
Yes, ma'am.
And it has taken 1 year that the BSNL is not able to relocate my landline connection. Now they are not responding at all. They are saying cabling is not there.
Yes.
How is it that in such a post locality cabling has not been done previously? So this is the government sector, and nobody. I have gone to the office number of times. Nobody gives you a patient hearing. If you make a phone call, they do not pick up your phone call. This is the scenario in BSNL. And the employees say that BSNL, why should it be privatized?
Yeah.
Now, if you do not deliver service, it should be privatized.
Yeah. There is absolutely no doubt. Absolute no doubt. Absolute no doubt.
So another student.
But only one thing, ma'am. But the agency that should deliver should not be on a nominated basis by the government. It should be on a competitive basis. Yes. You cannot have crony capitalism. I think it's very, very important.
That is what is the scenario right now.
Yeah. So you have to come out of crony capitalism to competition. The heart of democracy is competitiveness. So please set the benchmarks and have open competition. I think that's not happening in India. That's not happening. That's a very sad thing. That's a very sad thing.
It's not a perfect market.
Yeah.
Another student, research scholar, wants to know, sir, do you have any information regarding the health, how COVID-19 has affected the health targets, like IMR and MMR? Or
no study has been done. No study has been done. I backed a study for the ASA workers. I had told you, ma'am, ASA workers. They are the frontline health warriors for India. I did a bit of a study and I found that they are doing a wonderful job.
Yes.
They get only 1,000 rupees per month. I interviewed 1,000 extra they get. 1,000 rupees extra they get. And they do a wonderful job. I think we have a very dim view of people who are in the lower ranks of society, but their commitment to a national cause is absolutely amazing. I don't have any other, data to make any statements.
We have actually a number of questions you have already answered. One question, sir, is why India ranks below the sub-Saharan countries?
Even Bangladesh also, in terms of malnutrition, we haven't done well. I think priority, what kind of priority you give. I think I studied Ethiopia, I found Ethiopia, because I have one scholar who is doing PhD with me. And I find that, most of the welfare schemes, is to their mobile in Ethiopia. Most of the schemes, so you get your money, you can spend. So they have made, the government is very sensitive and the NGOs are very sensitive. I think one of the reasons could be that there's a very healthy synergy between NGOs and the government, the civil society. In India, Raghuram Rajan has written his book, that third pillar. So whenever we discuss, Dr. Mishra, we only talk of the state and the market. But there is a society beyond that, all of you know the Great Society movement by Johnson, so Lyndon B. Johnson. So these are mechanisms through which, you build cooperation. And I think some of these South Africa Saharan economies, particularly Ethiopia, as I mentioned, I'll share with you, ma'am, 5 of our Ethiopian scholars, they did their PhD last year out of 18. And I have no hesitation in saying that they were far more sincere. Their research methodology was far more robust. They're very, very good in quantitatives. You generally link Ethiopia with hunger and malnutrition, So, but it was an eye-opener for us, their sincerity. They all finished in 3 years' time. And we didn't do any, so they are doing very well. These stories are not really brought up so well, They're doing very well. They have right priorities.
So, Dr. Mishra, do you have any question? Unmute yourself, unmute.
I think sir has given a wide spectrum and most of the questions have been answered. In fact, looking forward to tomorrow's deliberation, and it'll be most interesting because as such, we are doing a lot of work on SDG.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So we really had a brainstorming session for 2 hours. Thank you, sir, for giving me this support. Again, tomorrow we will meet. There is another question, but I think let me tell you the question just. It is again from Debasis, which you can answer tomorrow. Huge population of India is increasing the burden on resources for which human development is low. Is it so?
We'll come tomorrow. We'll handle it.
Yes, we will. It's a, you know,
It's a different.
I think he's.
I will
his
not like to be
ideas
Sanjay Gandhi. I will not like to be Sanjay Gandhi here, during emergency. So we'll handle it tomorrow. Thank you, ma'am, for
Population policy is important. Yes, population policy is important.
population policy is important. But
population
demographic,
policy is important,
but demographic dividend is not automatic.
Yes, that's true.
Demographic dividend, just because you have young population, that is no guarantee that you will develop.
That's already you have thrown the topic for tomorrow.
Yeah.
And sir, I think it will also be linked to the way the PDS system is working.
Yeah.
Like whether the PDS system is there any limit to the family size?
Yeah.
That is also a part of human development so far as nourishment is concerned. So tomorrow you can answer his question.
I'll do
so
that.
I think we should come to an end, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
So now participants, you all switch on your video so that we can have a photograph.
Screenshot is important. Yes.
Dipankar, ekta photo niye janna Bhagyashree, huh?
Again.
Yes, I have already taken. I'll just do that once again.
Please take the gallery view.
Yes.
Dipankar, because
yeah,
I have no
think
assistance right now.
I just like a lot of people have actually not switched on. So if anybody wishes to,
Please switch on your videos, please, participants.
And Dr. Biswajit Das, thank you very much, Dr. Das.
Okay, I'll take the snapshot.
Please switch on your videos, then
yeah, it's done.
Some are still coming in.
Mask. Please wear mask.
Thank you. See you tomorrow, ma'am. See you tomorrow.
Thank you, sir, once again.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Kali pun dekhavo, sir. Babu, ଭଲ ଅଛନ୍ତି?